Welcome back, YouTube University students, to part 2 of diagnosing and possibly repairing your 7.3 Power Stroke no start issue without any tools. Let's continue.
Now, if you have a good set of healthy batteries and a good starter, the engine is cranking over good and strong, but the truck is not starting, you have a crank no start situation. And while you're cranking the engine over, the two things you're going to want to watch on your dash: number one, you're going to watch the upper left hand corner, your oil pressure, and number two, you're going to want to watch down here in the right hand side, your RPM needle. And you should see your oil pressure building while you're cranking the engine, and you should see your RPM needle moving just slightly. But let's go ahead and crank the engine over and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Engine's cranking over good and strong. We see oil pressure build. We look over at the RPM needle. We don't see any movement on the RPM needle. So what that's telling me is, yes, we're getting oil pressure in the engine. You are feeding low pressure oil to your high pressure oil pump. So your injector should be able to fire. With your RPM needle not moving, that's telling me that the crank position sensor is not sending a signal to the computer letting it know that the engine is cranking over. And this is one of those situations where you're going to learn that it is a good idea to keep a crank position sensor in your glove box. And I don't mean go to your local auto parts store and get a crank position sensor. You want to get a Motorcraft crank position sensor. And the other thing you're going to want to keep in your glove box with that crank position sensor is a 10mm wrench to be able to change the crank position sensor. Just for reference, your crank position sensor is located at the front of the engine on the passenger side, just above your harmonic dampener. It's got this little 2-wire plug that plugs into it. Unplug that, 10mm wrench, take that out, and basically you should be able to just pop it out of there. You might have to pry it out with a screwdriver, but once again, if you don't have any tools, you're not going to be able to make this repair. At least now you know what the problem is. But if you're cranking the engine over and you're seeing movement on your RPM needle, see how it lifts up just a little bit, but you're not seeing any kind of oil pressure build on your oil pressure gauge, that means that the computer is not seeing oil pressure. And in that case, the most likely culprit is on the driver's side head at the front of the engine. This right here is your ICP, and that controls the IPR, which is back underneath here. But if you're not seeing any oil pressure on your gauge, come up here and unplug your ICP. And a lot of times if you look inside the plug, you'll see that there's a lot of oil. If you look down inside the sensor, you'll see a bunch of oil. That means your ICP has failed. By unplugging it, the computer goes to a default setting and will allow your IPR to provide the engine with 700 psi. It's either 700 or 800 psi to at least get the engine to start. And that will basically be limp mode. You're not going to have a ton of power, but you will be able to start the engine and you will be able to at least drive it home. Now, if you're towing a heavy load at this point in time, you're probably going to want to go ahead and unhook whatever it is that you're towing at the earliest possible time, so that you're not trying to pull a heavy load when your power is limited on the truck. And if you have a situation where you're seeing your crank position sensor is giving you a signal at your RPM gauge, your ICP is working properly, and you're seeing pressure at your oil pressure gauge on the dash, the next thing that you're going to want to do is down under here towards the back, lower right hand side is where your IPR is located. And you're going to want to check and see, number one, is your IPR plugged in and locked in? And number two, is the tin nut on the back of the IPR, is that missing? And is the little top hat missing? Because there is a field coil that operates your IPR, which is a little shuttle valve inside, which provides pressure to your injectors. And if those two pieces are missing, they're probably located in the oil valley right there. And if you find them, put them back on and you should be back in business. Back side of the fuel bowl, but if you look down in there, let me zoom in and try to get the camera to focus. This right here, if I can get my pointer down there, that right there, that's your IPR. Make sure it's plugged in. Make sure that the plug is fully engaged and the little wire that cams over that connection is locked in position. The other thing you want to look for is this little nut on, it's called a tin nut. It's a little stamped nut. And is it on and is it tight? And I will come out here and show you what it is that we're looking at. That's what your IPR looks like when it's not in the high pressure oil pump. I'm really starting to not like this camera. But at any rate, there's your IPR. And as you can see, the tin nut is missing. Usually if the tin nut falls off, then this little hat will fall off. And they're usually both just right down there in the valley. If you start fishing around, you can find them. You can put your hat back on. But what it is this is a magnet, and that thing will start sliding back and forth on that rod or on that shaft. And I've seen them actually slide almost completely off, and usually that will cause your engine to die. It'll definitely cause your engine to not start, because there's a shuttle valve inside of there, and this magnet actually controls that shuttle valve. And so if everything can move around, then you're not getting the correct shuttle pressure to the shuttle valve, the correct oil pressure for the shuttle valve, and that's what is controlling your injectors, firing your injectors. So while you're up underneath the hood, check and make sure that it looks like that, and it has that little tin nut on there on the very back. So you've checked your oil, you've got plenty of oil. The engine cranks over good and strong. When you're cranking the engine, after 45 seconds, maybe a minute at the most, you're seeing oil pressure on your oil pressure gauge on the dash. As you're cranking the engine, you're seeing your RPM needle at least flicker a little bit, so that you know that you're getting a signal from the crank position sensor. The next thing you want to look for, and this is especially in the winter time, when you turn the key on the 99 to 01 trucks, you will see in the bottom right hand corner, you will see a wait to start light. If I can get the wait to start light. If you do not see that wait to start light, then you want to pull your panel off. It's underneath your steering column. You can do that basically with your thumb. Push in, turn. If you got a quarter or a nickel, you can use a quarter or a nickel to pop that panel off. It's just the 4 quarter turn screws. And then you want to find your fuse panel, pop it open. Fuse number 30, right hand side all the way down at the bottom. Fuse number 31, that position is usually empty, but right hand side all the way down at the bottom, 30 amp fuse. That fuse is probably blown if you're not seeing a wait to start light on your dash when you first turn your key on. Before you change that fuse, you want to get up underneath the hood, and where your fuel bowl is at, look on the back side of the fuel bowl, and you will see that white plug right there. That white plug is for your fuel bowl heater, and you want to unplug your fuel bowl heater. Just push on the little clip on the top and then pull out on it. Unplug that heater. If you change that fuse before you unplug that heater, as soon as you turn your key back on, you're going to blow another fuse because your fuel bowl heater has shorted out. Once you unplug the fuel bowl heater, go ahead and put another fuse in there, take your radio fuse or whatever, and truck should fire up and you should be good to go. As long as you leave the fuel bowl heater unplugged, you won't have an issue. This will also cause your truck to die as you're driving down the road. Once again, this is usually something that happens in the winter time. So that's only on the 99 to 01 trucks. Fuse number 30 only controls the fuel bowl heater and the injector drive module on the 99 through 01 trucks. In 2002, they changed that. It is no longer fuse number 30. Now, I have it underlined here, it's fuse number 105. So instead of standard fuses, you're going to have these square fuses, 101, 102, 103, 104, 105. So this will be the fuse that will be blown if you have a malfunctioning fuel bowl heater. Now, the one thing that I did notice is that I'm going to go ahead and pull this fuse out. That fuse does control the fuel bowl heater, and it does control the injector drive module, just like on the 99 through 01s. But why they did this, I don't know, but this is really, really dumb. You still have a wait to start light, which is that little curlicue looking thing, and it goes out, but the truck won't start because that fuse has been pulled out of the panel. So if that fuse was blown, you won't know it because you'll still have a wait to start light on the 2002 and newer trucks. But if you have a crank no start issue, look at fuse number 105 and check and see if that's blown if you have a 2002 or newer truck. Last but not least, what else could cause your truck to crank but not start? Well, as you can see on the gauge here, I'm showing that I've got a quarter of a tank of fuel, or just under a quarter of a tank of fuel. But believe it or not, I might be out of fuel. Well, no, it's not because the sending unit is reading wrong. It's because these trucks are notorious for the fuel pickup tube down inside the tank to actually break off. There is a foot that's probably about 2 inches long that has a screen in the bottom of it, and it will fall off of the fuel pickup tube, and at that point in time you will basically start running out of fuel when you're down to right around a quarter of a tank is where it usually happens. A lot of times if you start watching the forums or checking Facebook pages, you'll see people talking about the Hutch and Harpoon mod, and that's one of the things that they're modifying, is they're removing that foot. But at any rate, how do you check and see, is that my problem? Or do I have a bad fuel pump? Well, your fuel pump isn't like a Chevy fuel pump. When you turn the key on a Chevy, you can hear that fuel pump run from a mile away. Whereas on these Fords, when you turn the key on, you really can't hear the fuel pump run. Now, I'll show you where the fuel pump's located on the truck, just in case you have somebody with you that they can turn the key on and you can slide up underneath there, and you should be able to hear the fuel pump underneath the truck. On the driver's side, right there is your front wheel, and if you look right there, that cylinder right there, that's your fuel pump. I got me a helper, and so I'm going to be able to show you what the fuel pump sounds like when you turn the key on. Okay. That's all the louder it is. The next thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to get up underneath the hood, and right here where your fuel filter is and your fuel bowl is, on the back side, you'll see a yellow drain valve lever. And if you push that towards the back of the truck, it will open up the drain valve and drain all the fuel out of the fuel bowl. And you're going to want to get yourself something, hopefully, that you can put underneath passenger side front tire. Go in about 1.5 feet and put you a pan or a bucket or something there, because that's where the fuel is going to drain out. And if you can avoid it, you don't want to just drain it out onto the ground. But anyway, once you stop seeing fuel draining out, climb back up underneath here and shut the lever back over into the closed position, and then you want to get back up in the truck and you want to cycle the key. Turn the key on, give it about 10 seconds, and then go ahead and crank it. And then shut the key off, and then turn the key on, give it about 10 seconds, crank it, shut the key off. You're going to want to do that 5, maybe 6 times. And after you do that 5 or 6 times, you want to come back out here and you want to climb back up underneath the hood. You want to open up that drain valve again, and you want to see, did you get about the same amount of fuel coming out of the drain this time? You might get just like a little trickle. Well, no, the first time around you probably got, maybe a cup and a half, 2 cups of fuel. So if you open it up a second time and you only get like a little trickle, that means that no, your fuel is not getting up to the fuel bowl. So even if your gauge shows that yes, you've still got a quarter of a tank, chances are you're in a situation where the foot inside your tank has fallen off and you are basically out of fuel. So once again, this is an easy fix. You just need to dump some fuel in the tank and you're back on the road. Now, as a side note, you want to spend the extra money when it comes to sensors and buy Motorcraft parts. Whether you buy them through Ford or a reputable aftermarket provider, you want to spend that extra money. Do not get on Amazon and buy the ICP and IPR combo for $150, whereas the ICP by itself through Motorcraft is usually $150 and the IPR is $200 plus. Situations like that, you're going to be sitting alongside the road at some point in time wishing that you had spent the money just one time and bought good quality parts the first time, as opposed to spending money trying to cheap out and getting crap parts that are going to fail prematurely. Same thing with the crank position sensor. You can pick one up for $25, $30 at your local parts store, and you are going to find yourself sitting alongside the road with that 10mm wrench, changing that part out, putting a good Motorcraft part in, if you can find one at that point in time, and wishing that you had just gone ahead and spent the money once and been done with it. So that is my recommendation. When it comes to sensors on the 7.3 Power Stroke, spend the money, buy the Motorcraft parts. You will not regret it. If you cheap out, you definitely will regret it, and you'll find yourself sitting alongside the road because of it.
And that is going to conclude video number 2. Now, hopefully you got something out of one of these 2 videos, or maybe both of these videos, that either will help you diagnose and possibly repair your truck if you have a 7.3 with a no start issue, or maybe it'll help you somewhere down the road if you end up with a no start issue. So if you did, please hit the like and subscribe, and until next time, keep living your best life. Get on out in the garage and fix something, especially if it's your truck.